I mean, I honestly believe that Elvis has left the building. I mean, I think he's passed away. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think a lot of his most loyal fans look at it as an insult that anybody would even think that Elvis had actually faked his death. But, you know, Elvis is so big in life and in pop culture that we just can't let things go like this. I mean, the great legends, if it goes back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, it's almost like they become gods on Mount Olympus. And the idea is they're bigger than death themselves. And since the music we listen to every day reminds us of the great art that Elvis Presley had, or any dead rock star, any dead artist, that, you know, they live in our memory, live in our hearts. The music makes them immortal. So what we do know is that Elvis Presley died on August 16th, 1977, and there was a number of questions that came out right after his death that were very puzzling, and a number of books that came out that listed mysterious information that maybe this was not Elvis in the coffin was too heavy, all these stories, the autopsy facts, the idea of a life insurance policy that was not cashed. And since the years have gone by, a lot of this has been discredited. But what I was always amazed with was how people still believe that it's true. And
well, was the life insurance policy cashed?
Well, that's what I need to know. I haven't researched that, but I did hear that there was $1 million life insurance policy that had remained uncashed for several years after his death, and maybe it has. Maybe Dan knows the answer to that. I'm not sure. I haven't checked into it, but it is interesting.
I didn't think there were many people that were still maintaining this possibility that Elvis was alive. What do you know about it?
Well, first of all, as you know, this myth or this urban legend is probably one of the biggest urban legends there is, you know, in the country. I mean, everybody always talks about it, and most people just joke about it, you know. But,
sure.
But there's certainly a group of people that are passionate about the fact that Elvis is still alive, and that wasn't him. And that, you know, initially began after his funeral, because a lot of people said, look, that wasn't Elvis in the casket. And then, you know, his autopsy was sealed, his tombstone's misspelled, and things just built from there. There's a lot of amazing facts out there that would lead one to question, did Elvis really die on that day?
Well, if it wasn't Elvis in the casket, who was it?
Well, there's different theories on that, and that's what our film's about, is that we're doing our best to stay neutral on the subject. We think that as documentary filmmakers, to do it right, you've got to try to keep an open mind. And so what we've done is we've interviewed people on both sides of the story. We have interviewed many conspiracy theorists, people that have seen Elvis or claim to have seen Elvis after his supposed death. And so we've interviewed all the people that genuinely believe that Elvis is still alive. But to be fair to the subject, and I'm sure your listeners can appreciate this, we've also interviewed all of Elvis's closest friends, particularly the people that were there when he died. So we've been real fair to the subject, and it's just been a fascinating ride.
Who was in the room? Who was there right after he died? Was it Linda Thompson that found the body?
No, it was Ginger Alden, a girlfriend that he dated, you know, for not a real long period of time. He dated Linda for 4.5 years, and then he started dating Ginger, and people said that Ginger was never really as close to him as Linda and even other girlfriends were, but in any case, she was the first one to see him in the bathroom.
Right.
And she thought something was wrong, but she was very complacent about it. She didn't really, like, run to him and say, oh, my gosh, Elvis, are you okay? No, none of that. She didn't even really go in the bathroom. She peeked in, saw he was slumped over, and called downstairs and said, hey, guys, you know, called the security guys and said, hey, guys, come here and deal with this, you know.
But wouldn't you? Wouldn't you do that?
You know, that's my thought.
It's totally understandable.
If my loved one were slumped over in the bathroom and I thought something was wrong, I would probably run to them and see if they're okay.
But wait, no. See, I don't know that that's true, and maybe you're right. But if I'm the girlfriend, and he's still the king, he's still Elvis Presley. It's not like, you know, it's not like they've been together that long that she opens the door.
Keep in mind, this has happened many times before.
Oh, has it really?
A good number of times when Elvis had, you know, a physical ailment, and maybe she was tired with it. Maybe she rolled her eyes and thought, all right, here you go again. You know, I don't know what the exact case was, but in any case, she didn't really deal with it, and she just called downstairs on the phone. And she called downstairs, as a matter of fact, so nonchalantly that Joe Esposito picked up the phone and didn't even want to deal with it himself. He told Al Strada, one of the security guards, he said, Al, why don't you go upstairs and deal with it? And Al says, give me a minute, I'm doing something. And Joe says, listen, go upstairs, figure out, find what's wrong, and then you can come backstairs and do what you're doing. So Al was the first one to really go up to Elvis.
Well, that speaks to the number of times, then, that Elvis had to be helped back up onto the toilet.
Yes. I mean, he's not necessarily on the toilet, but just in general, him having some sort of a, passing out or having some sort of a situation, perhaps drug-induced. Perhaps
drug-induced. Now, let's talk about the drugs. I mean, Gary said, and this is the story I've always heard, too, that, there's a lot of fancy footwork done around the Elvis Presley autopsy. In the end, what do you conclude?
Well, in my personal view, it's a tough question to answer. There's so many different stories out there, and we don't have anything that proves concretely whether he's alive or whether he's dead.
Well, if
he's dead, I would think it's drug related, and that everybody seems to be really trying to protect that story.
Okay. And if he's not dead, then who was slumped out of? Is the whole Elvis face down on the on the plush carpeting of the bathroom story? Is that's a myth that it never happened? They made it all up. They coordinated the story between Joe Esposito and Al and Ginger, or what? Did he fall over? And then they said, "Oh my God, the story's out," but he still had a heartbeat, and so they screed him out of Graceland somehow. I mean,
let me share this with you. And I want to leave a little suspense for people that want to see the film.
It's 7 months from now. Don't worry. It's 8 months from now. 9. They'll forget.
Okay.
They'll forget. Don't worry.
We've interviewed Joe Esposito and Al Strada, who were both there. The first three people, well, Al Strada was the first one up there. He came downstairs and brought up Charlie Hodge and Joe Esposito, and unfortunately Charlie passed away a few months ago. But so Joe Esposito and Al Strada were the first people in the bathroom, and both of them shared with us that Elvis was virtually unrecognizable. It's an interesting biological thing that happens to you, that when you die, and this sounds a little bit morbid, but your heart stops pumping.
Sure.
So blood gravitates downward.
You're right. It
Elvis
pools.
was literally face down in the carpet, and he'd fallen over onto his knees and his face, almost like in a tripod, if you will, and blood gravitated down. So his knees and his legs and his face and upper chest were literally purple. And he'd already started to suffer from rigor mortis. Now, what's interesting is just a few hours prior, he was playing racquetball. So one of the most fascinating things about this is it is almost impossible for his heart to have stopped, blood to have gravitated downward, and him to already have stiffening of his body within such a short window of time. So that in and of itself, opens up a lot of questions.
How much time had passed since Elvis had gotten out of the bed? And I'm assuming Ginger made some sort of note as to when the king got up to go to his throne. And so she knew how long he'd been in there?
Formally documented as to what time. And as a matter of fact, Rick Stanley and David Stanley, Rick Stanley had literally been delivering envelopes to Elvis with drugs to help him sleep, and he was more likely to know, when Elvis was last alert.
Okay. And by the way, Gary, I don't mean to freeze you out of this conversation.
No, it's fascinating. I'm listening. Okay. I've talked to Dan before, yeah.
Okay, so, but I mean, if you ever have a question.
We've interviewed Gary for the film. Gary will be in the film.
Well, I'm glad to see that, and he should be in a lot more movies, by the way. I believe.
Obviously, very knowledgeable about music history, and
I thought he should have been in that new Stallone movie too. But I think he's a movie star in years in the making.
It. Exactly.
All right,
thank you. I need to make you my agent. Yeah.
So, all right. So, again, though, I mean, so what's the The belief is what? What's the story? What's the narrative?
There's a lot of conspiracy theorists that believe that somebody else had donated their body to Elvis, and then Elvis knew approximately when this guy was, had some sort of a fatal disease and wasn't going to live long, and he had a similar body structure and appearance to Elvis. But even Joe Esposito and Al Strada, in interviewing them, couldn't point blank recognize Elvis being there other than the context.
That it didn't look like Elvis. No. It just should have been Elvis.
Because he was in the bathroom, and who else could it be, of course?
Who else is going to have their pajamas down around their ankles in the king's bathroom? Right? I mean, that's what
exactly.
It's just okay. All right, then hang on.
Elvis. You run in there, there's a guy on the floor. He's probably Elvis, looks like Elvis. His face is purple, but he's stiffening up, and he's oh my God, everybody's panicking, and I couldn't imagine the amount of stress that was going on between all the people and the panic.
The grave robbing story, this is the big one, because as we've always heard the story, it was an attempted grave robbery. What did you find out for the movie?
Well, this is a fascinating story because we stumbled across this accidentally. When you're investigating, a story like the myth about Elvis still being alive, you uncover a lot of rocks. And we started looking into the grave robbery story, wondering what the story was behind it. Because if you look back in the month or so after Elvis died, there was tremendous media coverage about the grave robbery. It was a front page story on newspapers around the country. And so we tried to track down the grave robbers, and we had a lot of trouble, and we literally had no luck. And finally we tracked down an FBI agent who was knowledgeable about the situation. And so we interviewed him, and it was an amazing story. He introduced us to the grave robber. And the grave robber has been literally in witness protection for a dozen years after the grave robbery.
Okay, shut up. No way. Why would he be in witness protection?
Well, this guy used to work as an FBI informant.
Okay, wait, stop.
It's a fascinating story.
Wait. So, and you can join me too, Gary, in saying,
okay.
Wait.
Yeah.
All right. So the guy who tried to rob Elvis's grave was already an FBI informant before he attempted to do it?
Well, at the time, he was only a police informant. This was the late 70s.
Okay.
Prior to that, he was a troublemaker, and he had worked on Elvis's ranch in Mississippi. And he'd gotten into some trouble himself. He was a troubled childhood, that kind of thing. And he started working as an informant with the police department on drug deals and things like that. And what ended up happening is he got invited the day after Elvis died to meet with Vernon, Elvis's father. And they met behind a bowling alley about a half a mile from Graceland. And this is a real private meeting. And it was a couple of attorneys, the grave robber, and Elvis's father the day after Elvis died. He wasn't even buried yet. And Elvis's father asked the grave robber, his name is Ronnie Lee Adkins, asked Ronnie Lee Adkins, what can we do to get Elvis buried at Graceland? And Ronnie said, listen, because Vernon explained the story that he asked the city about burying Elvis at Graceland, and the city of Memphis said, listen, there's zoning laws. You can't bury Elvis at Graceland. And so they were, Vernon wanted an excuse to move Elvis to Graceland. So he literally hired Ronnie to rob the grave or make an attempt to rob the grave so that the city would then allow him to move Elvis to Graceland.
Get out. And this is the first time
this is... There was a police informant that worked with Ronnie that was in on it, and he was the only police officer that was in on it.
No, wait. Now, he was a police officer or police informant?
There was a police officer that was also in on the whole deal. So there were only three people in on it. There was Ronnie, the grave robber, a police officer, and Elvis's father.
Vernon. Now, is this the first time this information has ever come out?
Absolutely. And Ronnie has never been interviewed on camera or anywhere else about this until now.
Okay. This is amazing.
It really is. And, and of course for us, we look at this and say, wow, I mean, if Elvis really isn't buried there, if that's not Elvis's body, well, then that's a heck of a good way to keep that secret, because Elvis was buried in a public cemetery where other people could have access. But now that he's buried on private land, no one will ever know.
So how much did he actually do then? I mean, I'm assuming he and Vernon struck some sort of deal. What would be enough? What would be too much?
Well, here's what happened.
What are the terms?
Well, Ronnie even suggested that Elvis be buried in a mausoleum. Elvis's mother was buried on the far side of the cemetery in the ground, and Elvis wanted to be buried next to his mother. But instead, they buried Elvis in a mausoleum at Ronnie's request, because that's a better place to stage a grave robbery. So that's why Elvis was buried in the mausoleum.
And so he does what? What does he do to actually do the break-in, and how much did he get paid? Do we know?
Well, we don't, because to be fair to both of them, the FBI said that Ronnie was paid. However, Ronnie is a very proud man, and he claims that he wasn't paid, that he did it because he's a son of Memphis, and he did this for Vernon as a favor.
Okay.
So, and I understand that.
Right. And payment could get funky anyway. He could have winked him some green as a tip, not actually. Right. Okay. So what does he do? How does he? What does he do?
Elvis was buried in a mausoleum. It was a huge ceremony, and everyone knows about it. I mean, the crowds, they had hundreds of thousands of people in Memphis for the funeral and the ceremony and all that. And shortly after, within 2 weeks after Elvis was buried there was a grave robbery attempt, and they actually tried to do it 2 days. The police had an insider that was in on the deal, so the police were tipped off, and there were a dozen police officers waiting for the grave robbery to take place because they had a supposed tip. And only one police officer knew that this was all supposed to be staged.
All rigged.
Exactly.
Okay, so what does he smashes it with a big wrench, or what does he do?
Ronnie came in with a bunch of tools, and two other friends of his came with him, but he was the point man. And they jumped the fences and came in with all their gear to rob the grave, and the police busted them and chased them, caught them, and arrested them. The two other guys that were with Ronnie got let off with no citation or anything, and Ronnie spent 8 months in jail for the grave robbery.
If the fix was in, why did he have to spend 8 months in jail?
Because only one police officer was in on it.
Well, that's quite a favor to be doing for somebody for free.
It was quite a favor. Yeah.
I mean, if he didn't actually take any money, I mean, get a salary.
Honestly, I think he did, but I mean, it's I'm not going to confront him on it.
Okay, so then so then they move the body, or so we're. I mean, did he actually see the body? By the way, does Ronnie ever see the body? Did you ever get that close?
Well, what was neat is Ronnie actually got into the hospital and made an effort to steal the body, tried to get close to the body there. He made an attempt there. And because, again, remember, he knew about it the day after Elvis died. He got offered.
Right.
And he tried to get to the body there. But he never got close enough to make any statement one way or the other.
All right, so he doesn't actually ever see the body, and he doesn't see the body in the grave, and we can assume that other people saw the body going into the grave at Graceland, can't we? I mean, are there people there that saw a body, or did they just see the casket?
Well, Elvis had an open casket funeral, and that's where a lot of the controversy began. Is the National Enquirer snuck a camera in and took a famous photo of Elvis.
Right.
Still, the top-selling newspaper of any kind in the country was that issue of Elvis on the cover of the National Enquirer.
I think I probably bought one too. All right, so then that should seemingly put it to bed. Then Elvis Inside.
Other than it doesn't look like Elvis.
Well, but I mean, all right, who are those in the Elvis inner circle that believe that Elvis Presley is still alive. I mean, shouldn't this be a done, settled issue for them?
Well, you have to keep in mind that these people are very, very loyal to Elvis. So you have to begin with that premise. But thereafter, we have interviewed them, and there are some real interesting facts that have come from this. Linda Thompson, his girlfriend of 4.5 years, was at the funeral, and she and her mother had questions about whether or not that was Elvis in the casket. And here's, to me, one of the most fascinating ones. Al Strada, the first guy to find Elvis dead in the bathroom. Al Strada. He was also the security guard at Elvis's funeral. And he said countless people came up to the casket and said, "That's not Elvis. Where's Elvis?" And this is the guy that found Elvis in the bathroom. And I just think that's fascinating.
Well, but then again, it does speak to dying face down, slumping over off the toilet, and the blood that pools up in the face, and, all of the other things, the distortion that can be hard for a funeral director to be able to, kind of reshape, don't you think? Or maybe not. I mean, I think there are some people that die in such a way that they look very natural, and lots of people who they have open caskets for, and you don't look too closely because it doesn't look like them, but it's not because somebody faked it.
Right.
Right.
No, I agree. It very well may be that Elvis passed away on that day. We are exploring this myth and this urban legend, with an open mind.
Sure.
And I'm not really here to try to convince anyone, particularly here today,
right,
that Elvis is in fact alive.
First of all, you have many points that need answering, and you don't seem to answer them so far. One would be that if Vernon, Elvis's father, met with Ronnie Lee Adkins and an FBI agent, which wouldn't make any sense to me why an FBI agent would be involved, to put Elvis in a mausoleum solely for the purpose of setting up the theft, that would mean that Vernon would have had concocted the scheme somewhere between August 16th and August 18th. Now, if we assume that Robert Kendall, who worked for the Memphis Funeral Home, who handled the arrangements, located a crypt for Vernon to put Elvis in, let's say on the morning of the 17th, then when did he put this whole plan together? That means the whole thing would have had to have been in motion in less than 24 hours after Elvis passed away, and here you have Vernon Presley, who's exhausted, distraught, and Joe Esposito is even reporting back to Kendall that Vernon is exhausted and everything else, but yet he can muster up the energy to concoct a grave-robbing plan. But they're going to meet in a back alley with an FBI agent and a known Memphis Police Department informant.
Corey, I never suggested that the FBI agent was at the meeting.
Yeah, I think you're mixing those two stories here.
Yeah,
what would an FBI agent have to do with that anyway, and why would somebody...
Wait, Corey, it's not... You're mixing the two stories. All he said was... And I am the host, so I was listening carefully. He said that this guy, Ronnie, has been under FBI witness protection for the last 11 years. Prior to that, he was a police informant for the Memphis Police Department.
But you think it's a rational thought that
the police wasn't
period that they're going to have muster up and within a day or two a big plan like this?
Well, Corey, I know in the interest of accuracy, you're going to want to slow down here, because at least admit that you were wrong on the FBI thing, because you were making a weird connection there and you were trying to use that to discredit Dan, and that's not what he said. He didn't say anything close to that. Now, as to whether Vernon was too exhausted or distressed to be able to make a plan like this, I don't know that anybody could know. When my father died, I had all sorts of weird thoughts about what I was supposed to do, and it's part of when you're going through a grief process like that. You say and think all sorts of weird stuff.
Well,
I guess
Ian,
you don't.
Why would be the point that? Why would you need an FBI involvement at all just to move a body from?
You're getting this wrong, Corey. The FBI is not involved. I don't know how you keep going back to this. The FBI was not involved. You've compressed the two stories. You're not listening. He was not. The FBI was not involved, and Dan never. At no point did Dan ever say the FBI was.
Then drop the FBI part. Maybe I need to re-listen to what he said, but he did mention FBI.
Yeah, because for the last 11.
Drop the FBI part, but still, why would there be any need to concoct this plan solely just to try to get Elvis moved from.
That's fine.
From
Fine. Go ahead. Let's give him a chance. Dan, go ahead and answer that. Go ahead.
And also, Dan, the
wait.
body...
Let him answer that.
Wait,
Corey, come on.
First.
Let him answer that.
Okay, if I could. I don't know. Again, I wasn't there. All I know is that when I had the opportunity to track down the grave robber, and I had the opportunity to interview him, and he agreed to be on camera, I heard his story, and he shared his story on camera. And so all I can testify to is to what he told us on camera and what he told us off camera. That's all I can tell you. I can't read into Vernon's mind. And I can say, though, that if there's a zoning law, and this applies to most parts of the country, if a family member of yours passed away, you wouldn't be able to bury them in the backyard of most cities in the country unless you're in a very rural area. And if you're in a city of Memphis, certainly zoning laws could prohibit that, and Vernon wanted to find a way to get around the zoning laws, and to get a variance, he was willing to go to extremes.
Well, he probably could have got a variance anyway, since they named it the highway after Elvis. It was Elvis. I don't think it would have been that hard to do. They would have had to concoct this plan. Also,
the fact that they did deny him.
Elvis
denied him, and then he asked again after the grave robbery and got approval. So,
to answer one of your questions earlier about how come Elvis is not buried next to his mother at Graceland, he was. But you got to remember, at the time, there was only Elvis and his mother there. Now there's Elvis, his mother, grandmother, and father. So things have been moved a little bit to accommodate to make the space. But Elvis was buried next to Gladys when it started out there.
So you're saying, is there any photos of his tomb next to hers? Because I'd love to see it. That would be great. I would love that.
From the family, would there be no reason to release anything like that to the public?
Well, fair enough. I guess we'll just have to let that go. And Corey, I know historians tend to get their egos wrapped around what they know, and if somebody knows something that they don't know or thinks they know something, that things can get a little touchy. Corey, I'm going to finish that sentence. Corey, I'm going to finish that sentence. Corey, because you really just proved my point right there. It sounded a little touchy. Go ahead and interview it. Find out for yourself. If he's wrong, prove him wrong. I don't think all he's saying is this is what the guy told him. So if you can prove that it didn't happen, prove it didn't happen, and that's all you got to do. So there's no reason to attack anybody or to try to discredit. Just find out. You're a historian. Go ahead. But I would do it with a cool head.
Ian, how about the bathroom? How about the bathroom issue?
Okay, Corey, I'm
really.
Do you
think the man's going to?
Corey, you're not fun.
He's going to have a scenario where he's using the restroom. Do you think that sounds feasible? Why would somebody want to do that for their legacy? I mean, that doesn't even make sense.
I don't know who you're asking the question of. Who is it that you're asking?
You made a point to keep asking about the bathroom stuff.
I was curious
about it, and you kept.
But who disagrees with you?
Now I'm telling you about it, and you're telling me I'm wrong and don't want to hear it.
Corey, who disagrees with you? Who disagrees with you in this conversation? Does anybody disagree with you? I don't disagree with you.
I'm telling you that you kept talking about the bathroom issues. And
right.
I'm telling you the whole feasibility and rationale of an Elvis is Alive theory would make no sense when you base this total class, gracious, sincere man is going to hatch a faked his death scenario, but you're going to have him passing away when he's using a restroom is going to be part of his plan that he's going to use for this?
This is why you need...
these alive theorists love to use, is that.
Okay, but the difference is here is you're not talking to any of them. So if you want to use that tone... Wait.
This earlier.
Corey, chill. If you want to go... Corey, chill. If you want to go have that conversation with somebody who believes that, then go give them all that attitude and you go get in their face over it. I don't believe it. Dan's not saying he believes it. Gary said he didn't believe it, but we're all asking questions. So we're just talking and we're just exploring it. Now, nobody here disagrees with you. So you can bring your claws in. You can get your hackles down. Nobody here is a conspiracy theorist that believes that Elvis is alive. Certainly not me. I just asked questions. I hope that you can do your research in a calmer and more fruitful way than the way in which you've participated so far in this conversation. And we'll just leave it at that for now. And then we go to Bill, who is on the west of the Rockies who claims that he is the brother to Ronnie. Is that right, Bill? To the brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law. I'm one of three brother-in-laws, unfortunately, and oh boy, I tell you what. Well, first place, he didn't.
Excuse me, Bill. Your brother-in-law of Ronnie?
Unfortunately.
Why do you say unfortunately? I found Ronnie to be a very engaging man.
He is. He could sell sand to the Arabs and snow to the Eskimos, but he's also a sociopath. And if you knew what I knew about him, you wouldn't believe a word that came out of his mouth. I've known him since 19. He did not spend 8 months in jail over this body snatch. He had his picture on the cover of Star magazine wearing a three-piece suit. The only time I ever saw him in a three-piece suit. And we've heard so many different stories about why he did it. One of them was he was offered $1 million by a Memphis businessman. No, he was offered $10,000 a piece to him and his buddies, and then the businessman was going to ransom the body for $1 million, or else he was going to sell parts of it to Elvis fans. That was one story that Ronnie told. But he wound up on the Federal Witness Protection Program entirely over something else, and he got kicked off that years ago. Oh, man, I just don't know. I don't know how much I can tell you without getting sued for libel by Ronnie.
And I have to say, honestly, I'm kind of in that category with you right now. I don't know that he's a sociopath. I certainly don't have any evidence. I've never met the guy, and I'm not really willing to besmirch his name, whether he's in the Witness Protection Program or not. But
would you like me to give you the name of a Pulaski County deputy that you can call, and he will tell you a lot about Ronnie?
Well, Bill, I would very much like to hear what you know about the situation, because in making a film, I want to be as fair to the subject as I can.
Well, now, there were two, back in 78, there were a couple of script writers that flew into Memphis, and I saw part of the script that they put together where he claimed to be secret agent B-52. Yeah, I mean, this stuff, the reason he was narking for the cops is because the cops.
I'm afraid you're breaking up. You're breaking up, Bill, and we want very much to hear you. So I don't know if you're moving around, stop doing that.
I'm sitting still.
Okay. All right, but you're breaking up a little bit. So let me ask you this question, Bill. What do you believe was Ronnie's motive for trying to rob Elvis's grave?
Money.
But who is paying him?
Well, I'll go for the Memphis businessman theory first. That Vernon one surfaced last. See, I'd been to a couple of Elvis's parties, and a friend of mine was his valet, Richard Davis, and I'd worked with Richard before we went to work with Elvis. Richard was a tremendously nice guy. In fact, all his bodyguards were Red West and all those guys. They were tremendous people. I'd met Vernon, but the thing about it is, I've known Ronnie well for 30 years, and you cannot believe a word he says.
Well, Bill, let's go back to the original premise. In a nutshell, you know that very well that he attempted to rob the grave and that it was arranged by someone. He wouldn't have done it on his own. Was he, in fact, paid or asked to do it by Vernon? If not, who? You can say what you want about him. You can say what you want about Ronnie, but why would he have done that? He would not have done that on his own.
Oh no. There was.
Did Vernon ask him? In your opinion?
No, I don't think Vernon did.
Did someone ask him on behalf of Vernon?
Yeah. Did the police officer that was Ronnie reporting to? Could the officer have been contacted by Vernon? And that officer said, "I know a guy I can get to do it," and he pulled on Ronnie's chain.
That is possible. I can't deny the possibility of that. I will say this: I called Crime Stoppers on him 3 times, and they wouldn't touch him.
How about that? That goes to show you he was untouchable. They already knew his name over there.
I mean, really, he was. In fact, my brother-in-law, I left the state because my brother-in-law one of my other brother-in-laws found out I was doing, and he said, "You're going to wind up with a 5 pounds of marijuana in your trunk. The cops are going to pull you over, and you'll be going to jail." And
he was so connected, you were afraid he was going to set you up, you're saying?
Yes, because I've known he did it to other people.
All right, well, let's just say this. We don't know any of that. Those are unconfirmed facts, so I don't want to get sued by Ronnie. But I think that's – first of all, I want to commend you for doing what Corey couldn't do, and that's for disagreeing without being disagreeable and for challenging without having to make it get personal. So thank you.
I think that's real fascinating, Bill, and I hope you can reach out to us.
Check the 77 issue of Star Magazine with him on the cover.
One thing I was going to say, I think Corey was confusing the fact that you had said the FBI agent introduced you to the grave robber.
Right.
That might have been the issue he was having.
Amongst others.
Yeah, amongst others. I wanted to ask, why was he in Witness Protection Program? I don't know. Did you?
Yeah, I never got around to that.
There's a lot of reasons for that. I can't go into it, but it's basically he worked as an informant. And he puts himself in interesting situations, and he had to, he needed protection.
And I'm just surprised that he got out of it. After 12 years, usually
he's still not living under that name, though.
Okay.
He's not living under his birth name.
This is one of those great stories, much like Elvis's supposedly faked death, where Jim Morrison in another country. Jim Morrison is perhaps more easily fled to Africa, and some of the other legends. Tell us all about what you know about the Jim Morrison controversy.
Well, the thing that's incredible about it, first of all, is that we're going to be able to talk to a member of the Morrison family, and they've never been interviewed. So we're going to hear from the inside, which is going to be great. But the legend goes that when Morrison left and moved to Paris, he was afraid that he'd be put in prison from the obscenity trial in Miami. And Morrison's attorney was convinced that if Morrison went to prison in the United States, he'd be murdered. He went to France because he couldn't be extradited for sex crimes. And while he was over there with his death, he died on July 3rd, 1971. He was buried, I think, July 8th, 71. The grave was leased for 30 years. And the Morrison family wasn't told until he was buried. And when the first book, No One Here Gets Out Alive, by Danny Sugarman, when it was written, it was left almost open-ended because he wasn't really sure Jim had died. And when he talked to Pamela Corson, Jim's living girlfriend, and he asked her, is Jim dead? Pamela said, well, if Jim were alive, he would have called me. Now, this is a strange thing. No one saw the body in the coffin. The doctor who performed the autopsy, or not an autopsy, the doctor who signed the death certificate, has not been interviewed. And when Bill Siddons came over, all he saw was a simple wood veneer coffin with the lid screwed in place. It was a very cheap coffin, and he was buried. Now, the hope was that in 2001, Jim would be dug up and sent back to Los Angeles, but the French have now allowed him to stay since the graffiti's cleared from the cemetery. And I think the Morrison family pays for that. So we have this great urban legend. And when we meet Alan, here's a guy from Liverpool who marries Anna Morrison, and it's in 1967-68. And by the way, this is the 40th anniversary of the Doors. So tonight, 40th anniversary of the Doors, Elvis's 42nd birthday. How timely is that, Ian?
That's perfect, and that's why we bring in Alan Graham to tie this all up for us.
None of the family interviewed. There's never been a book written about Jim's life from inside the family, and there never will. I've been writing one for 30 years, by the way, and because of what I call the Morrison ghost, here I am another year still doing this Morrison thing. But the real truth of the matter is that the way he died and Pamela's behavior right after started the whole thing, because this is what happened. None of us knew he was dead until 3 days after he was buried, which means that a lot of funny stuff went on, and no one called us. No one said he's dead, or we're going to bury him. Nothing like that happened at all until we heard it on the radio, if you can believe that. And so right after that, some funny things happened. Pamela went to the American embassy, as you're supposed to do with the death certificate and the passport of the deceased. If he's an American, within 3 days you have to do that. So she went there. And so she didn't bring the passport, and she told the authorities only that he was an American and a friend, not that he was famous, not that they had anything real involved, but just that he was a friend. Step one, very confusing. Why did she do all of that? Well, to cover, she didn't want any publicity, right? But then she comes back to Los Angeles and then disappears for 3 weeks. And I located her in San Francisco. She's hiding out with a friend. All very strange. So I thought, this is my opinion, this is what I thought at the time. She and Jim had planned something, and she was just being very secretive, and she was going to come back and not say anything, and then she was going to get the inheritance because that's what we all felt, and then she would go off somewhere and meet Jim on a desert island. You know, great little story, right?
Right.
One little problem. The very first day we met her, that means when Jim and his sister reunited after, several years of being estranged in Los Angeles, the first thing Pamela did to her was say, well, look, come in the bedroom, I want to show you something. And she showed her a handwritten will that Jim had said, everything goes to you if I die, and if you die, everything goes to Jim. It goes to my brother Andy and Anna. So that was the first thing. So Pamela was,
Well, I want to make sure I understand those pronouns. When you said to you, meaning to whom?
Well, the will said, I leave everything to Pamela Susan.
Okay.
And then she was telling them, if I die, then everything goes to you, because their name were in the will too. But it was written on an envelope, evidently under duress, and she'd been nagging him. But think about it. The first thing she sees, his sister sees, her brother's will.
Right.
It's kind of cryptic, isn't it? So then when he started behaving badly after he died, we all thought, what? No one knew, because she was so weaselly, about the whole thing. But I'll tell you this, Clara Morrison, Jim's mom, died recently, and she went to a grave believing that Pamela had something to do with the death of her son.
Really?
Yes.
Well, tell us more about Pamela's life after that then. I mean, she got all the money?
Well, what she had to do to prove common law wife status, she had to get everyone she ever knew, and they all wrote affidavits. Oh, yes, I knew you when you lived with Jim 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And she took all of these affidavits to a judge, and, of course, the Morrisons never went near the probate or the will. They wanted nothing to do with it. They just didn't want any publicity. She went to the judge, and the judge said the following, well, seeing as how no one's here to contest it, I guess you must be his common law wife. And because they lived in Colorado, and there was a little technicality about living in Colorado for X amount of time, was the final censure. So she got the money, listen to this, and very soon after she overdosed on heroin and died. So she got the money all right, but she never enjoyed it.
Well, who got it after her?
That was the most interesting part, because all that finagling to get that money, if she hadn't have done that, if she'd have just gotten palimony or whatever it was, she could have, of living with him. What happened next was, because of the way she got common law wife status, when she died, it reverted back to both parents, because then Morrison was still, he's like a wife. So instead of all going to her, it went back to both parents. And that's kind of weird, because otherwise the Morrisons wouldn't have gotten a penny.
So the Morrison parents got half, and then her parents got half?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So then, so that's how that stands. And the Admiral said, why did he come out and have a conversation now? What was his inspiration for talking now about Jim Morrison?
They're making the 40th anniversary is coming up, and they're making a documentary. And he was very disappointed in the film, as we all were, by Oliver Stone, because it was an abortion, a train wreck. And so he wanted to put a couple of things right, and the only reason he interviewed was to say the following, which it isn't out yet, but I'll let you know, let the audience know ahead of time. He, for a long time, was estranged from his son, but finally accepted this and used this analogy. He said, when I think back, my son was no different than those guys who I flew with in World War II. They were they never thought about tomorrow. They always thought they were going to die. They were they were all, full-on guys. They lived the maximum every day, and they were kind of reckless. And he said my son kind of flew into the sun like they did. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that was how he, in the end, came around. But during Jim's lifetime, it was very hard, because he was an admiral. He was fighting the Vietnam War. He was commander-in-chief of the Marianas Islands. That was a huge command right in the middle of the Vietnam War, and Jim Morrison was saying, no,
right.
Stop the war. So there was this impossible juxtaposition. And so when Jim died, I must say, in a way, it was a kind of relief.
is there anybody amongst the inner circle of Jim Morrison friends and family that believes that Jim Morrison might have survived? What is the best known name, or is there anybody that has ever claimed to be in touch with Jim Morrison, or is it just one of those things that gets said because, like Elvis, it's just kind of hard to comprehend that he should die similar to Elvis in a way, die in a bathroom, right? I mean, he died in the bathtub, Alan?
Yeah, and by the way, before I go on, let me tell you a little interesting thing that just happened in connection with that bathtub and that. Recently, on my site and several other sites, there were some pictures just published where the coroner, 20 years later, 30 years later, I guess, went back and interviewed for, the documentary, and he pointed to the bathtub where Jim lay, and he interviewed and he talked all about it, and we noticed, I have a couple of French ladies, 2 in Paris, and I have another one in Canada, who are kind of investigating this since this incident. When he pointed to the bathtub and said he was laying that way, his head was there. His head would be laying against the faucets. And I don't know if you ever taken a bath with your head on the faucets, but that's the way they found this bloated figure with this beard who they said was Jim Morrison. So from then on, there was always going to be a mystery. So in 1981, Jim's sister and I made a ghost rock opera called Morrison the Rock Opera, where we had 7 Jim Morrison ghosts. And we interviewed Max Fink, who never interviewed anyone ever since, by the way, Jim's lawyer, and what he told about Pamela's behavior and all of that even deepened the mystery. So if anyone listening wants to see that Max interview, by the way, they can go to subsin.com. That's my affiliate, Underground Film Friend, and you can download it there. Or my site, lizardkinglounge.com. It reveals an awful interesting lot of details that would make you think, this guy is not dead. Well, since then, and at that time, for example, one time in Paris, this story to me was like the most real. Like about a year after, a guy who was a bartender there I knew said to me, there was a guy called Dieter Gerner or something like this who hung out and was a hippie in Paris at the time and befriended Jim, or Jim befriended him, and they looked very similar. But you couldn't tell one apart of us, by the way. If you had long hair, you couldn't hardly tell a face. A lot of people looked the same. So he would hang out, and Jim was well known for bringing home every misfit he found in the bar. So he stayed at the apartment, and he wore a couple of Jim's shirts. And I heard a couple of bartenders gave him free drinks because they thought it was Jim. So this guy milked that for a long time. But on the other hand, the weirdness of her taking that passport and it disappearing after that, it was like it just left all of this possibility. And for a long time, I never believed it. And, it's like the only proof that I have is that he might be dead is that I've been haunted by the son of a gun for 30 years, as real as I'm talking to you, and I'm not joking. And a lot of people out there know exactly what I'm talking about.
I want to get back to that, but let me say, so did the Dieter guy disappear too at the same time that Jim Morrison did?
He was around after, which led to even more mystery, was Jim didn't die because he would show up in his bars wearing that same shirt that he either robbed or Jim gave him.
I see.
So they thought and the bartender.
That was part of what fed the mystery. Then this Dieter guy is still walking around in Jim Morrison's clothes.
I bet you.
Okay. Presuming that he died, how did he die?
If he died, well, I think he was done in a bathtub, just like Marat Sade was killed in a bathtub by a revolutionary friend of his who with either paid assassin, or in this case, I think Pamela either let him die or when he overdosed didn't do anything or ran away. And the way I heard it, which is the reason I want people to go see that Max Fink interview, was when she saw him there in the bathtub dead and then ran away and left him there all weekend. That's how freaked out she was. And then she brought back Marianne Faithfull and Agnes Varda to help her. By that time, evidently, he was bloated. And you couldn't tell if it was Elvis or Liberace in the bathtub. So it's more mystery, So, and when Bill Siddons got over there and saw the cheap coffin sealed, it was like when he came back and he told Sugarman, that was all Sugarman needed to really say, well, he's not dead.
But would there be a toxicology report or anything?
See, this is the agonizing part. Nothing, not one movement toward an autopsy, and the parents didn't even come back from Guam because the admiral you had to get them on a radio telephone. That's how far out they were, and so they didn't even bother to come back for the funeral because there was none. They didn't come back after for an autopsy. They didn't come back for an exhumation. They didn't try because they didn't want one. As far as they were concerned, he was dead, and the mother, as I say, Clara, believed because of Pamela's behavior and all of the manipulation she did, that she had something to do with it. But there's another side of it. There's like a whole bunch of people over the years have claimed that they've got Jim Morrison's blood, that they're his son, that they're his daughter, that they've been married to him. And it's like, man, it's like an incredible amount of, ghosts that are still around for, Jim Morrison exists.
What's the timeline, as you understand it, for Jim Morrison's death, roughly speaking?
Well, it was early, probably somewhere between 4 and 6 a.m. on July 3rd, 1971. And a lot of the questions, and like I know Alan was talking about how Pamela may have been involved, one of the stories I've heard was that when Jim came home early that morning and where he'd been at the Rock and Roll Circus at a nightclub in Paris, or he'd seen a Robert Mitchum film, whatever. Those are some of the stories that he did the night before. But when he came home, he found this white powder. And he was very much against Pamela using heroin. But one source said that Jim must have thought it was cocaine, and he snorted it, and he had a major respiratory infection. And when he got into the hot water, he had a heart attack, and there were drops of blood that were found in the water, which would imply that maybe it could have been drug-induced. When he thought it was cocaine, it was actually heroin, and he died. So that was one of the stories that goes there with the time frame. The reason that there was no autopsy was because if Pamela had known that Jim had drugs in his system and an autopsy had been performed, then Mary Ann Faithful and the Count were there, and the story goes that the Count, who was a friend of Pamela Corson, had supplied the heroin. And if the body had turned out with drugs in the system, then there would be arrests that had to be made and an inquiry on where the drugs came from. So that's why no information was given, and Pamela Corson had to sell the coroner on the idea that the terrible respiratory infection had brought about a heart attack, and he had died in the bath. So the coroner signed the papers, no autopsy, and that's going to block everything as far as the actual cause of death. But it was in July. It was very sultry, and the body had to be kept because the funeral homes were closed that weekend. So one funeral home came over with a body bag, and they packed Jim's body in ice, and Pamela Corson slept next to the body. Now, that's kind of bizarre, and maybe I think as much as 2 nights. And then the body was buried. When they had him buried at Père Lachaise, it was real interesting because the day before he died, he had been at Père Lachaise. And, of course, a number of the most famous French writers were there. And Jim was allowed to be buried, but they didn't say this was Jim Morrison, an American rock star. It was James Douglas Morrison, the poet. And this is why the French allowed him to be buried in Père Lachaise. So there's a lot of great secrets, a lot of great urban legends. And I guess it was 2 years ago, I got a call on Coast to Coast where there was a figure who claims to be Jim Morrison living in Oregon, and I was contacted by the publicist, Gerald. And I'll have to tell you, I really believe that Gerald is a very good man, and I sincerely believe that he believes this man is Jim Morrison. So what I propose with Alan and Gerald is we put together a documentary, and we solve one of rock and roll's greatest urban legends, is Jim Morrison alive? And we should do this, and we can report back on Coast to Coast. I think it'll be fascinating.
If you're looking for a TV crew, I know just the guy for that job too. By the way, but let me ask you about the idea that she ran away from the body and left it there for the weekend. Is that how you understand it too?
Well, I think that if she had actually left the drugs and he had taken it, she would have been terrified. She may have left the body. I'm not sure. I mean, she claims to have been there. She may not even been there till the weekend was over. I think that may be what Alan's talking about. When she comes in, she sees the body. But when she sees the body, it's horribly bloated. It doesn't look like Jim Morrison. And I think Mary Ann Faithful claims to have seen the body too, but they didn't look closely at it. So, that gives the idea. When Alan brought the idea of Dietmar, the German musician, you have so much evidence for conspiracy theorists that are going to pick this up. And since we're never going to be able to know who's in the grave at Père Lachaise, we're going to have to assume it's Jim. But if there are people claiming to be Morrison, this is a perfect opportunity to settle one of rock's greatest mysteries, and I'm ready to do it.
My question's for either Gary or Alan, whoever might have more knowledge about this. But in the early 90s, I can't remember the year, but I was stationed in Germany, there was an Us magazine. It had a picture of younger Jim Morrison back in his heyday on the cover, and inside there was, I think, a Calvin Klein ad for something, and there was an older-looking Jim Morrison laying on his side for the ad, and in the corner it said, modeled by Jim Morrison, former rock singer, current drug and alcohol counselor.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was an actual parody ad, and everyone believed that it was Jim Morrison. There was an uproar over that. Everyone thought, what a sick thing to do. They projected what he would look like older. Yeah.
Okay.
It was cool.
All
right, great.